It's Writer's Dream Time. I'm Linda Maria Frank. I'm the author of Annie Tillery Mysteries, a series for kids. They're just fun books. You can find The Writer's Dream on Facebook, and you can find us on YouTube. We've interviewed about 125 authors, so if you're interested in writing, publishing, marketing, and you need some advice, please go onto YouTube and watch some of our shows. If you are interested in being a guest on The Writer's Dream, please contact me through the Facebook page. Today's guest is Dr. Colomba Furio, and she has written Francesco's Song, which is a story about her father during World War II in Italy. So welcome, Colomba. I'm going to call you Francesca. Colomba. Welcome to the show. Tell us about your book.
Hi, Linda. Thank you for inviting me. It's very nice to be here and give me an opportunity to talk to you about my book, Francesco's Song. And, I don't know where to begin, but I think probably the best way to begin is to show you the cover of the book. And the reason I want to show you the cover is because it has a picture of my father. My father was in World War II in the Italian army as a carabinieri. The carabinieri reali were the Royal Carabinieri, and they were stationed, he in particular was stationed in Yugoslavia for a while and later in Milan. But the book is not just about his experiences. It's really historical fiction because there were so many gaps in the story that needed to be firmed up when I was writing the book. And so I took a lot of liberties with some of the events. But I did have a basis for many of the factual information that were presented. And these came from a whole box full of letters that he wrote to my mother during the war, and also documents that he had kept from the war because he worked as a secretary to the commander in the, while he was stationed in Yugoslavia and later in Milan. So back in the day when they typed things on typewriters, back in the day, when they made a copy, what they would do is you take a piece of paper and you put a carbon, and then you made a second copy. So he had kept all the carbon papers, and those were all in folders that I found in his house. And of course, they were all written in Italian, so it was very hard for me to translate them. I could read the ones that were typed fairly easily because I can speak Italian, I can read Italian, but the ones that were written, the letters that he wrote to my mother that were written in script, those were very hard for me to decipher. So when I first found all these documents, I put them, I was still working full time. I didn't have time to really devote to this process of trying to figure out what all of this meant. So I put everything in folders and I saved them for later on. And after I retired, again, I started to look at them, but I couldn't read the letters. And it was very frustrating for me because when they wrote back then, it was a very special handwriting. And unless you were from that generation, it was very hard to read.
Also, so, European script is different from American script.
Exactly. But I was very lucky. I did find a woman who she lived in Florence during the war when she was a little girl. So she was able to translate the letters for me. And that's when this whole world opened up to me. It was as if it was a time capsule that I'd opened.
Can I ask you a question? Was your father still alive when you started to write the book?
No.
Okay.
No, my father, I found the letters when I sold the house, and I had to, unfortunately at that point my father had, had Alzheimer's, and he was moved to an assisted living facility, and so I had to liquidate everything in the house, sell the house, get him settled, so it was not something that I could go to him and say, what does this mean on this and that. And
where did you find the letters?
The letters were, again, he had, we lived in a two-family house growing up in Flushing. And in the second floor, that was sort of like his studio. He had all his books there, he had all his opera records there, he had his uniform from the war, the jacket that he's wearing in the picture here, he had it in a glass case.
So you were really fortunate in having this treasure trove of resources, and even though you call your book historical fiction, because you had to fill in the gaps, you really had a lot of stuff to work from.
right. It was really, my background is in history, 'cause I do have a doctorate.
Yes, you're a doctorate.
And I had done historical research, so I knew the value of these documents when I found them. These are all considered primary sources for historians. And so, like I said, for me, I knew these were very valuable. It's just that for a while, it was very hard for me to figure this out. Once I started to figure out what they said, then came another part, because now I had to learn about something that I really didn't know that much about. For example, the Italian campaign in Yugoslavia was a subject in history I'd never studied. I really didn't know that much about it. Not only that, but there wasn't that much available about it. Only now are scholars learning about, because documents are now becoming available to historians to study. And so they've been doing that, and there are some books that have come out in this field, but it wasn't that much. And so now we're starting to learn about all of this, but at the time I didn't have that much. But I started to piece together exactly what had happened in Yugoslavia during the war, and it was just, to me, it was fascinating. The other thing was he was in Yugoslavia for a while, and then he was transferred to Milan. When he got to Milan in 42, Milan was being bombed by the British. So again, it was something that I didn't know that much about, and I had to research it to figure out, how did this whole thing, what happened? The other thing that, again, a lot of things in history seem to fall into place and make sense to me because of what was found in these letters and these documents.
Right. So the first thing you had to do was make sure that you had everything translated.
Right.
And
yeah.
then from there, how did you organize this research?
Actually, it's interesting because I didn't really organize it. Sort of wrote it. I don't want to say it wrote itself. It sounds a little ridiculous to say that, but it did seem to flow very naturally to me, because the first part of the book is not about the war. The first part of the book is about Francesco as a little boy. And again, a lot of they're just little kids. They're running around. They're having a great time. They're getting into all kinds of mischief. And this is really based on stories that my father used to tell us. When I was your age, we used to do this, and we used to do that. And they sort of like stuck in my memory. And I just felt I had to write these stories down. And I started off by writing those stories, and then it evolved into something much more than just these stories of, as a little boy, he's really not concerned with the fascists taking over. All he knew, they were going on parades, and they were going to Rome, and it was just fun, fun, fun. And then reality set in. He was growing up, and he had to find a way to make a living. And so what did young men do at that age? Well, it was, to become a carabiniere was considered a big honor. It was a big deal. It was very prestigious. And right around that time, he met my mother, which was where the
So
love
he was
interest.
Distracted from the politics.
Yeah,
shall we
they
say.
were, what's interesting in the whole book is how a people becomes seduced by the words of a dictator, and how, they went into this war with such high expectations. And, we're going to be back in no time at all. It's not a big deal. We'll put them in their place.
Boy, this sounds familiar, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it? It sounds very familiar. And that's where I saw the comparisons were just so obvious to me at that point. Mm-hmm. And there were so many other little things that I didn't quite understand until I started to write the book. One of the things that struck me was, I was reading it, and when you're writing, you're looking at the dates, and you're putting two and two together, and you realize he's just 19 years old when all of this is happening. I mean, in the pictures, he looks a lot older, maybe because he always has sported a mustache. But regardless, he was still only a kid. As far as we're concerned, 19-year-old is just he's just, and yet he was running for his life. And the other thing that I realized, I knew about this, but I didn't know that much about it. One of the things that happened to him in Milan after the armistice was signed in 43 was that the Italian soldiers were told to report to the German command for reassignment, because now Italy was no longer an ally. Italy was sided with the enemy, and so therefore they were the enemy. And he had to make a decision: do I report to the German command, or do I make a run for it? and his choice, as did many Italian soldiers at the time, was make a run for it. And he was rescued by partisans. They hid him in their house for many months.
Some people don't understand what a partisan is. You want to explain that?
The partisans were the ones who were against the Germans.
And they were
Basically,
really
they
not...
wanted to get the Germans, because once the armistice was signed, the Germans came through the Brenner Pass down into occupied all the cities in northern Italy. And
They're not really officially military. They're not officially
they're not
army.
officially military, no, but
They're like an underground.
It's an underground movement, yes. It's an underground movement to get rid of the Germans, because the Italian government at that time was pretty wishy-washy, and they just, actually what happened was they just packed up their bag and moved to Brindisi. They moved the seat of government from Rome to Brindisi, and so that pretty much left Rome an open, they called it an open city, but it was really occupied by the Germans. Mm-hmm. So at that point, the Allies were already starting to make their move through Italy, landed in Sicily, moved up, making a very slow progress toward Rome, occupying Rome. And of course, we know all the stories about
Salerno, Monte
Cassino, Anzio, and all of that. And so while all of that was going on, my father was being hidden in a family's attic in Seregno, which is outside of Milan. So Milan, if you go to Milan today and you take a little drive with your car, you go to see this cute little town called Seregno. It's right next to Monza, also a beautiful little town. That was the area that he loved, because that was the area that really saved him. Now remember this, we're talking about a 19-year-old kid who doesn't know anyone up there, and the story went that someone approached him, and I think they were trying to figure out who was this. They knew that a lot of Italian soldiers were on the run, and they wanted to protect them. They did. The partisans protected the soldiers that were.
They had to make sure he wasn't a spy.
Exactly, and that was it. That was exactly what happened. And so they questioned him, whatever, to see. And of course, this particular part of the story is very fuzzy to me, because I don't have all the facts. In fact, my brother told me, "Oh, don't you know?" He used to say, I don't remember the story, but he used to say, "This is the part where Dad jumped out of the window to make a run for it." And of course, that's exactly what happened, because he went to his police station, and by the time he got to the police station, it was already occupied by the Germans. And so they were put in their dormitories to be taken out the next day to Germany or the work camp, or who knows where. Mm. The Russian front could have been the Russian front, could have been anywhere. So that night he jumped out the window and made a run for it. And he hid in a lumber yard. And the next day he didn't know what to do. He couldn't stay in the lumber yard. And at this point he was approached by these men who asked him, they tried to figure out who he was and where he was coming from, and all of that. So, yeah, so in my telling of the story, it changes a little bit. But basically, it's the same idea, that this is, again, it's history, it's historical fiction, but it's based on things that really did happen.
In the book, do you cite your resources anywhere, or do you just treat it as historical fiction?
No, what I do is I have a bibliography at the back, but I didn't put footnotes. The reason I didn't put footnotes is because now it's not historical fiction anymore. Now it's a history book, and if I cite one place, I have to cite every place, and then it's not. You can't do that. You choose which way you want to go.
I think that's probably a good choice as far as the reader is concerned. What was the hardest part of writing this book?
I don't know. I think because as I said, I've done a lot of writing in different. I've written historical studies that is one kind of writing. It's very specific. You have to footnote everything documented. Then I did technical writing when I was a systems analyst. I worked on Wall Street for a while. So that's again, it's very specific, very different kind. Mm-hmm. This was creative writing, and I'd never done creative writing before. Creative writing has its own can of worms, so to speak. So you really have to. It sounds like, in a way, for me, it's very freeing. But on the other hand, it's very difficult because now you're really putting yourself in the place of someone else. You're walking in their footsteps. You're seeing you're feeling what they're feeling. It was very emotional for me.
I can imagine.
So, yeah, I spent a lot of time crying because
Yeah.
all of a sudden now I knew what it felt like because I had to put myself there.
I've created strangers, and
Yeah.
I find myself when I'm writing their story and feeling their feelings and in
Yeah.
their head that I'm crying or laughing.
Yeah.
It's that's a journey that a writer takes that I think is, to me, the best part of writing.
Yeah, yeah. And I was almost sad when I finished writing it because I didn't have that there anymore. It was like I didn't want to leave that place that I created for myself.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, but I do have to say that I knew that I needed a sounding board, someone that could listen to what I had to say. Does it make sense? Because you could write something and you think it's just great, and then someone else reads it and they'll say, wait a minute, what about that? Or what about this?
What do you
Or,
mean by that?
What do you mean by that? Or did you forget about this? I have one, I joined a few writers groups, and you read out loud to other writers, and they listen to what you have to say, and then they'll give their comments. And I had Francesco, my father, and he's just left Milan, and he's taking the train to go back home. This is the end of the war, and he's with another soldier, and they're traveling together. And of course, the tracks were blown up by the Germans. Of course, this is all pretend. Didn't really happen, but this is the part that I had to make up. But so I have them walking along, and the American soldiers are coming on their trucks, which is perfectly plausible.
That's what they did.
Yeah, but I had them running up to the Americans and waving at them, and one of the writers said, "Wait a minute, you've got an Italian soldier with a rifle on his? Oh, you can't do that. They would shoot." I didn't even think about that. But you know, it's little things like that that you don't realize because you're so into the story, and another person will pick up on that. So that was very useful to me.
Tell me about your marketplace. Yeah, you have a niche here because it's a story about an Italian American came to this country and was successful, had a family. Where do you tell this story about your book?
Well, I do belong to a lot of organizations that are of Italian American heritage, where I've read to the Italian American Writers Association. I've read there. I've presented to Italian American women's groups as well, and certainly Barnes and Nobles also, and other organizations on Long Island. But what I find is that it becomes very difficult to market a book like this because it is niche. It's good in a way, and it's not
It's a double-edged sword.
It's exactly, yeah, because for certainly anyone from that generation, I know people that have read the book that have loved it and have told me that they've connected with the story so much because, let's face it, a lot of people from that generation do remember what it was like. Certainly the woman who helped me translate the letters, she knew exactly what I was talking about. But if someone is not from that generation, perhaps would not be so interested in that particular topic, it's possible. Yeah, so it is a double-edged.
Well, there's a great interest now in stories about World War II. In fact, my book that is coming out, that will be a book in 2 weeks, is about my main character's great-grandmother, who was a test pilot for Grumman during World War II.
Right.
And it starts with a bunch of letters.
The letters, yes.
And so many people, I do a workshop sometimes on how to self-publish, and so many people come to me with, well, you know, I have this bunch of recipes, I have this bunch of letters, and they want to tell that story. One of the questions I like to ask authors is, when you were writing this book, you probably went through an evolution of what you wanted this book to be, but can you tell me what your expectations are of this book? Do you want a bestseller? Do you just want to tell a story?
I'll tell you, when I originally started writing the book, it was really meant for my sons. I have 2 sons, and of course my nieces, but particularly my sons. I did not want to have the stories disappear because, I don't know, I think it has to do with a little bit with the immigrant experience. you're always thinking about the old country, always thinking about what it's like there, what it's like. I remember as a little girl, I used to have these fantasies, oh, it would be so wonderful to live, because they would tell us what it was like in the country and the sea, and it's beautiful. I mean, if you've ever gone to Italy, you know, it's
Yes.
just beautiful. But that's assuming that you have a job and you have an income and you're able to live that way. Otherwise, back then, it was not so beautiful. So we were told all these stories, and I wanted to write them down. Once you write something down, it becomes concrete. It's there. Maybe they'll read it, maybe they won't, it doesn't matter, but it becomes concrete and it stays. Also, the book has a lot of photographs in the back and maps. And again, yes, I have the albums, yes. They are all on CDs. I've given the CDs to family, whatever, so that they'll have a keepsake. But if you put those pictures in context with a story, then it's a totally different thing. So originally it was for that reason, for my children. But then, as I wrote it, it became more than that. It became, we don't know that much about Italy during World War II. We really don't. I mean, we know it was hard, but we know a lot more about Germany, certainly, and other...
In England.